Hey, this is your boy Joey from the So Wizard podcast. You are listening to the Nerd Podcast Mafia. Entertainment your ears can't refuse.
Aw.
He's really sweet, but he's been hit on the head a couple times, I think, so.
Just like John.
Oh, special boy. Special boy. So.
Yeah, that's what my mom used to say.
Welcome to the continued podcast adventures of Superhero Speak.
But I think many of the people that love this character and that love superheroes in general have used these stories as inspiration to say, you know what, I'm going to do something good in the world. I'm going to make a difference like my hero when I was a kid.
That is my fondest memory of it, because when you're doing comic books, you want them to affect people, right? You want people to care. You want to strike emotions. And I knew that Clone Saga was striking a lot of emotions.
Can you imagine Pulp Fiction starring Goofy and Mickey Mouse?
I can totally imagine that.
I'm sure somebody's written that one too.
Quarter pounder with cheese in France, Mickey? What? Royale with cheese, Mickey. Yeah. I can totally.
See?
I would watch the hell out of that movie.
Yes, I gladly sacrifice that my progeny to you, almighty Marvel beast.
But Neil Adams is somewhere going, it's my time.
How do you measure success? Hey everyone, you're listening to Superhero Speak, and I'm your host Dave.
And John.
And this week, boys and girls, JD's off. I don't know what's going on. John's here, JD's gone. JD's here, John's gone. We can't get them together anymore.
We're secretly the same person.
You notice you've never seen them in the same room at the same time. But that's all right, because this week, boys and girls, we have a very special guest with us. She is the creator of the Kickstarter sensation, I Am Hexed. And, of course, we're talking with the one and only Kirsten Thompson. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you two?
We're doing good. I can't complain. I'm just feeling old.
Welcome to my world.
I became a grandfather 1 month ago yesterday. So
congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, my daughter had twin girls, so it's, I'm still not sure how I feel about being a grandfather, but it's also tiring because we're doing a lot of running around for her. So, but
I was going to say goodbye sleep.
But then I get there's one of the cats now.
Sorry, that's my Bengal.
But hey, I get to have a nice conversation with creators like you, and it makes it all better.
Glad to hear that.
So for the people listening at home, just to get us started, why don't you give the listeners the elevator pitch for I Am Hexed?
Okay, so I Am Hexed is a magical thriller political mystery. And I usually say that there's, magic, mystery, a little bit of romance, and an accidentally carnivorous plant, which always gets them saying, what? And I say, yeah. And it's the story of a witch called Charlie, or Charlotte Helm, and she's a junior staffer from Virginia. And the thing is that witches have been part of our world in Washington, D.C. since the beginning, but it's only since the civil rights era that, they've actually come out and, come out on their broomsticks and been open about it. And so they've always been there, but now they're actually fighting for equal rights, and there's all kinds of interesting struggles, and not so interesting and scary struggles that are going on. But Charlie becomes embroiled in this political conspiracy when her boss gets accused of corruption and all kinds of bad goings on. And suddenly she's the most wanted witch in D.C. And so she and her ex-girlfriend and a mutual friend and anyone else she can find are trying to get away from the different enemies that are coming after her. So there's a bit of a bunch of genres. It doesn't settle easily into one of them, which is actually kind of fun.
Cool. And is there so the Kickstarter is for issue 1, correct?
It is. It is a 4-issue miniseries, and it's completely written. Yeah, I was telling one of my friends, I feel it's wrong to I think for some, you can pitch something it's not completed. I like to pitch things that are completed or nearly so. Just that's what works for me personally.
Right. And we've talked to other creators that have made a point of that, actually, because if you have something to show, it's going to be more likely that people are going to say, hey, well, if you got a couple of pages left or you're just, coloring, then here you go, because they know that they're going to get something. Because of the history of Kickstarter with, vaporware and that sort of thing, with people getting millions of dollars for stuff that just never happens. But
I've seen those happen, and those are so upsetting to watch, because I've seen great ideas, and then it just poof,
Yeah, and it kind of hurts Kickstarters like yours where you actually have something, just about ready to go out the door, plus more stuff that you can send out when you get funded, and we don't want to lose that kind of stuff. You have your intro is you have a video intro on the Kickstarter. It's really cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you don't want to know how many times I had to record my voiceover bit.
I can guess.
Yeah, I hate talking to cameras. It's like, give me words or I can do that, but it's like, oh my God, don't make me talk to a camera. I'm a writer. There's a reason why I don't act.
I even like the signs that are on the front here. It's a fight like a witch, and
yes.
I don't know if this is a reference to what I think it's a reference to, but equality is magic.
Yes, so. These are the references are probably what you're thinking.
Yes.
And yeah, so, I mean, there was a lot of talk, with my editor, and then my friend Taylor Esposito is the writer, and he and I actually talk all the time about, what we're working on and ideas, and I often throw things at him. He's a very good sport about saying, that's a good idea, or that's completely nuts, and letting me know when I'm a little off track. So I did that to him today, and he said, oh, you should totally do that. I'm like, okay, well, guess what? You're probably going to have to letter it then. So, as friends do.
Nice.
Actually, back to your point about the video, as somebody who does voiceover stuff for the podcast, like pre-recording ads and whatnot, I totally get that. It took you many takes. It's
yeah.
What is it when you have a microphone in front of you and a script, you just can't say the words?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's also for me. When you're looking at your reflection and you're saying, did I, emphasize the wrong point, or am I looking sideways? Or, you always worry about those little things, I think. And it's easier when you're doing voiceover where you're not looking directly into a camera, you're just talking to a microphone, and you can just go.
Right.
There's a lot. You're not thinking about the inflection. You're just speaking more naturally, or you're giving voices. So I think that, for, professional voiceover artists, I think it would be hard for them if they're talking directly into camera unless they're used to that, because not all of them are actors. They're voice actors, and there's a difference. There's a distinction between the different professions. So I'd be interested to hear what some of them say. Some of them would probably be fine with it and say, oh, that's no big deal. And some would say, no, I just like to be in my booth and just do my thing.
Right. No, I agree. So I guess back to your other point too. So being a witch in your comic is an allegory for being gay. Is that what the gist is, or is it something else?
Well, being a witch in the comic is, first off, being a witch. I think that's pretty important to the story, is that witches are, much like any other minority group, we've always been here. Despite the fact that, people have tried to burn witches, they've tried to get rid of queer people, they've tried to get rid of, black people and, anyone else who's doesn't fit a certain archetype,
Right.
And so I think that there are definitely parallels. I did do a lot of parallels between the struggles of different minority groups, also saying the witches are suffering their own version of these, because instead of, stop and frisks, the witches have spell stops. For instance, you can't do certain magical spells on the street without a license.
Right.
And, so there's all these little things that, of course, certain groups are after them for these reasons, saying, how is a witch viewed, in the public eye? Or is it cool? Is magic just an awesome thing? Or is it, I think one of the phraseologies I use is basically a witch is a walking weapon, because they can do these scary spells, quote unquote, and they could turn you into a frog. Of course, conservatives would be worried about that.
Sadly, there's plenty of history for you to draw from for all the different myriad ways that they could be received.
Yeah. Yeah, and this world is one that has a really rich history, and, fingers crossed that I get to do more with it. I actually pitched my editor an additional, something else in this verse today. He's like, oh, that's cool. But there's a lot of history that isn't shown in this arc yet. There's a lot of tradition, and there's lots of I'd love to delve into. But I think, one of the things in the first arc is you're establishing a lot of stuff. You're sort of setting the stage, as it were. And there's a lot of stuff, scenes, that I get to talk about and share.
Cool.
Are you drawing the storyline from something that happened to you in the past, or from your own history, or from things that you've seen? It's an interesting mix, is what I'm saying, because I get the political intrigue and all that, and then you added the extra dimension. You don't just have LGBT in there. You've also entered witches into the equation, which seems like it's a completely, a much higher level of difficulty now that your protagonists are going to have to deal with.
Well, I think that as someone who loves urban fantasy and fantasy in general, I was, that's one of the mindsets I slipped pretty easily into. Mm-hmm. And then I think like everyone with a soul, I was watching the election in, 2016 and just watching the nation go red and was horrified. And, I started thinking about, how people view, these kind of events and, what's happening in America. And the phrase witch hunt kept being bandied around.
Oh, yeah.
I found it so interesting. The people who use the words witch hunt are the people who would never be hunted as witches. And I thought, well, that's just special. You guys, this would never happen to you because you're none of the things that would get you outcast from the community or viewed as dangerous. I thought, well, what if there are witches there that are actively affecting events behind the scenes, and they're not, there are rules about magic. You don't cast a spell on the Speaker of the House and make him behave like a normal human being. So you might want to, but that they are there affecting change in small ways. There are rules in place of how much you can do and what is acceptable.
That becomes the crux or the foil for every urban fantasy storyline is if you have magic, how was it missed before, and why haven't the people that wield it taken over completely by now? So,
well, I think that a lot of cases it can come down to there are people who would try to, and people with consciences are supposed to, in many genres, are there to stand up for what's right.
Which also mirrors real life, basically.
Yeah, yes, there is that, certainly. But I think that a lot of witches don't necessarily want to rule the world. They would like to, go about their lives. If you're someone down the road who, perhaps has a small shop, you don't want to run a country. You just want to sell your goods, feed your family, and live your life, and you happen to be a witch, And certainly there are witches who are more interested in politics, but I think that no one group is going to want to do the same thing.
Right, which, you definitely could argue that's a reflection of real life as well. Yeah, there are people who just want to have a normal life and be left alone. So. Right,
and then you have someone like Charlie, who we don't get into a lot of her background, but she comes from a pretty, standard regulated, witchcraft background. Her mom's pretty powerful, and there's a lot of politics going on there. And she went to D.C. trying to change things for the better for witches. She's got this idealistic streak. And, over the course of the story, she both has to come to terms with that and also figure out different ways to help. One way may be working, but then she can do something else.
Right.
That was something so dealing with that too, because there are other characters that are far more pragmatic than her. She's pretty pragmatic in certain ways, but, her ex-girlfriend, for example, is definitely a behind-the-scenes fixer type and occasionally her work calls for her to blow something up, and she enjoys doing that.
Who doesn't?
And, yeah, I mean, there's some great panels of Jaya, who is Charlie's ex-girlfriend. There, she's just having a ball, and there's some really fun magical duels in there. They were a lot of fun to write. And then you have someone like Florence, who is a scientist and an herbalist, and so she wants to be on her own to create things and analyze compounds, and she does not want to get involved in that nonsense. She just wants to do her thing, and occasionally people bring her new puzzles, and she's delighted. So she would just as soon none of this touch her unless it's relevant in some fashion. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious with the aspect of the witches in the story. There's a lot of stories to draw from. You have from the recent Harry Potter to the way wizards are portrayed in Lord of the Rings to the way they're portrayed in The Wizard of Oz. Was there any particular style that you drew from? Did you do an amalgam? Like for their powers and what they can and can't do? What was your inspiration for that?
Yeah, because that gets hard because everybody's got a different type of vampire now. You got sparkly vampires, you got the Harry Dresden 3 vampire flavors. It's everybody's got. So go ahead.
Well, I think that for one thing, these witches don't use wands, and I like the idea of wands, but I also thought that one thing I wanted to do was have a kind of magic where even if you can't speak or you can't hear, you don't need to say a spell or hear a spell, and so they have glyphs, and so there are schools where magic is taught, so if you're blind, no matter what your state of being is, you can learn magic if you have the aptitude, and someone is going to want to teach you. And so if you can, these glyphs are drawn, and there are different glyphs for different spells. And I think if you look at the cover, you see that Charlie and Jai are standing on a glyph, so they're floating in air. And because Charlie has her hand outstretched, and she's drawn this glyph, and it's supporting them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so there was a lot of magic, sort of theory, and because I've seen all the Harry Potter movies. I've read all the books. I read them when they came out, which was great fun. I think my sister and I are the fastest readers we know, and so we would read the books, and then we could talk about them, but our parents don't read as fast. So forbid us to talk about them in the house. You have to go into another room and whisper about what was happening in book 4 because they hadn't read it yet. But, and of course had Lord of the Rings read to me when I was really little and loved Gandalf and all that. But, sometimes I felt like there were some strictures placed on the magic, or, I just wanted to do something a little different, obviously than what we've seen before. And I just wanted to have something that's more inclusive. And I felt like the magical system that is in these books, in these comics, is hopefully going to be outlined in more detail. But to start with, you don't need to say the spell. You draw the spell. There are a lot of different spells. Obviously, you haven't seen all of them. You won't see all of them. And, they were really fun to design. I worked with Christian Goudreau, who is the artist who designed this. And we had a lot of fun. Some of the influences we looked at were a lot of anime magic as well. Mm-hmm. So a combination of sort of ancient languages and meanings there, as well as sort of the style of some animes. So that was a kind of amalgam of that.
Oh, cool. So you put a lot of work into the research for this. How long have you had the idea? What got you started doing this? What made you say, yeah, comic books, it's really hard to do. I think I'll throw my hat in.
Yeah, what possesses us to do this crazy thing?
Yeah.
I've asked myself that a few times over the years. So I started reading comics when I was little, and I remember that I got a couple issues of comics that I still have upstairs somewhere in my long boxes from my dad for Christmas. And it was at the point where he would reward me for getting a good math grade by taking me to the comic shop and getting me a comic, which did wonders for my math grade, let me tell you. Yeah, it was like, if you get a B on this test, you get a new comic. I'm like, sweet. But, I kept, reading comics, and I've, read all the big two and collected them for years. And I went to school for linguistics, and while that doesn't seem tied to comics, it was actually good because I started editing things for people. And so I sort of came in sort of indirectly through linguistics and language, and was able to sort of see sort of the indie side, which has been really valuable, I think, and just see how things work on that end, just sort of the work and the time it takes, because I think that some people think, oh, it just gets made. It's like, no, I had this idea, I pitched this to someone last year, and it's now on Kickstarter. It's not an overnight process. It takes a long time. I couldn't talk to people about it for a long time, which was really hard. It was the Witch Project. How's it coming? I can't tell you. My family was just annoyed. Like, why? Like, I can't tell you. Things are happening, but I can't talk about it. Yeah, so I think that just reading, I think that everyone should, read a lot of comics if they want to go into comics, and just see, how hard it is and how much effort goes into it, in the long term.
Oh, definitely. And what I find interesting about this comic is, we talk to a lot of independent creators, and we get people who are a lot of horror stories, or we've had people who do, it's a like medieval times night story and things like that. And then very rarely do we have someone who tries a superhero, but yet this is even different than all of that. Like, this is a very different idea. And did you have any reservations about going forward with it because it's so different? Or did you say to yourself, well, this is what's going to set me apart, and this is what's going to attract people to the story?
Well, this is the second comic miniseries that I finished. Mm-hmm. I pitched a previous one, which I think it's good. I think that if I wanted to publish it, I would, punch up certain things. But I think that it was a good testing ground for certain concepts and style choices. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to tell this story. The idea of, witch hunting, and, it sort of ties in, over the past couple of years, with the Time's Up, Me Too movement. And there are a lot of angry, awake people, in this country. And I think that there is something about witchcraft in particular that is a good medium for talking about that. I think because, and I've talked to friends previously about this, but the idea of being a witch and being part of a minority group, they're similar in that it is just existing is an act of resistance, because you could be burned for being queer, for being a minority. You still can. You could be burned for being a witch. And so I felt that it was a good medium, a good vehicle. I love magic. I love the hope of magic, because we have a lot of dark turns in stories, mm-hmm. Bad magicians, and of course, he who must not be named. But that doesn't mean that the story doesn't end, hopefully, that there is not good. There are so many great stories about magic that have, heroism arrives out of the conflict. And I think that that's important. This is a story where some bad stuff does happen, but it's also a story about these three women coming together and not backing down and not saying, well, yes, we'll just, allow ourselves to be caught and carted away and disciplined as is proper. They say, well, no, we're going to find out what's going on. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep pushing. Oh, look, we found what's going on. Let's tell people, Mm-hmm. It's also, about, friendship and people reconnecting and all those things, and the carnivorous plant. So it was a fun story to write. It was fun. It was just, it's like, yeah, there's scary stuff going on, but guess what? They're also doing magic, and that's just really cool.
You keep injecting that.
Yes.
that
accidentally carnivorous plant.
I really want to know what that's about.
Carnivorous plant, and I can't tell you why, because it's a spoiler, but there's a little story, plot point about this plant, and it's just a fun little moment because things go awry in labs occasionally or with magic, and results can be unexpected. So it was just fun to put that in. I was like, because sometimes you write something, you say, oh, this is going to be one way. I have it outlined. When I outline something, I have a broad strokes outline, and then as I write, I really break it down on my index cards. I was like, I know where this is going. And then I started writing, I was like, no, this is going sideways. Oh, this is going somewhere I completely didn't expect. Alrighty then. And, so now it's a fun little spoiler that I can't share yet, but I think everyone will enjoy what happens with this little plant.
Well, there's going awry, and then there's somehow creating dirt flavored cola. So it's I can't wait to see how that comes about. So you've got the Kickstarter. I don't know how you're going to make 10,000 at this point because you've gone over. So now you have to somehow turn it back to make your $10,000.
No. That's not how it works, John.
I get my total today going, holy cow.
So at this point, we still will have a link to the Kickstarter in the description of the episode, but you are funded. Now you're doing your stretch goals.
Yes.
Which
is really
So I'm assuming the funding is going to cover printing and paying artists and whatnot.
Yes. All those things are covered. Yes.
Do you have any kind of distribution plans past the Kickstarter?
That's still, under discussion. We're just, sort of waiting after we get the Kickstarter, sort of completed and then figuring that out. But that would be great, obviously. But for now, I'm just focused on Kickstarter and then actually, finishing the book because, we've got Christiane and Little Corvus and Taylor are ready to go and the script is ready. And so it's just a matter of finishing this.
Yeah. I kind of wish JD was here. He could probably give you a couple ideas on where to go with it. He's actually an independent creator as well. So,
nice.
Yeah. But, so you said you had a 4-story arc. This is first issue. Do you have a timeline at this point for completion of the first issue and then when you'll get started on the second issue?
Well, we don't have a timeline, precise timeline yet.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's end of the Kickstarter. I think that we would, in order to do the second one, we'll see how far we get on funding, because if we get to a certain point in funding, then we can do the first, couple pages of the second issue.
Right.
And then at that point, we would see, in regards to distribution, is that something where, we can just jump right into that, or do we need to wait a little while in terms of those kind of plans? So obviously it would be nice to be able to just sort of do it all at once, and if that happens, I will be thrilled. But obviously this business is, quirky like that. So you just sort of have to be flexible. I mean, that's the one thing I think, I've definitely learned over the years is you just have to be flexible and just sort of go with it and figure out how best to make things happen, because it's not going to happen in a straight line. It might not even happen in a jagged line,
As a former boss of mine used to say, you have to be like the willow. Just go where the wind, go with the wind, and it'll happen.
I was gonna say, steal the baby and use the wand. I mean,
probably that doesn't happen in this story. There's no stolen babies, thank goodness.
So I'm curious. You said you're a big fan of urban fantasy. Obviously, you are. This is an urban fantasy story. What are some of your favorite urban fantasy, books or movies or television shows?
Oh gosh, that's a long list. I think you mentioned Dresden, of course. I love those books. The October Day books, the encrypted books. I have a ridiculous bookshelf, a couple ridiculous bookshelves. I'm looking over my shoulder. It's just crammed with stuff.
Ilona Andrews, Faith Hunter?
Yeah, I have read those. I think that Ilona Andrews has a new sci-fi romance out. Things like Maggie Stiefvater, which is kind of urban fantasy, kind of new adult, that kind of line. The Raven King, that kind of stuff. And then, I've watched probably every urban fantasy show, good or bad, just a lot of bad.
Yeah.
But, obviously, things like Buffy are, classic, if somewhat dated right now in terms of the voice, the concepts, which is sad. But, there were definitely some great moments in those shows. Right now, we don't have as many good urban fantasy TV shows. We've got a lot of superhero TV shows. We have some really good sci-fi right now. I binged the last few episodes of Westworld this weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, I have regrets regarding my lack of sleep. Serious lack of sleep.
I have a question. I don't think John watches Westworld, so John, close your ears.
I haven't finished. I finished. Was it season 1? I haven't done season 2 yet.
Oh, okay. So not to spoil anything, but did you know there was an after credit scene after the season finale, and did you watch it?
I haven't seen the after credit scene yet, but I was spoiled for it. I was like, I went on Twitter. Blast! I got on Twitter. I'm bummed. Currently, they're not going to release the third season until possibly 2020.
I know.
Which is really upsetting on a number of levels. But I've been yelling about it, to people saying, oh my God, if you haven't caught up, you really need to catch up because it's, great, obviously. And it's just such an interesting take on sci-fi and, Westerns, blending genres, which I think is really neat, instead of making a standard, just genre take. I think that's really cool. I also thought it was interesting because there's an anime called Sword Art Online. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'd watched that a few months ago, and I really loved the concept, the idea of what people do when they're in these virtual worlds and what kind of people they become. And then you have Westworld. What kind of people do you become in these circumstances? And I thought, if you like Sword Art Online or you like Westworld, you should watch the other because they have similar concepts, but they say different things.
Yeah. And if you like Sword Art Online, you should look at Log Horizon, or there's Sword Art Online Alternative now, Gun Gale.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and of course, I say if you like those, you should definitely watch Full Metal Alchemist. So you can cry and laugh and then cry your heart out.
Yeah, Alphonse, I got it.
I love recommending that to people. It's like, this is so great. I'm like, just you wait. Then they text me and they're cursing my name. I'm like, this worked out so well. I'm like, so glad you enjoyed it.
That's when you know. That's when you know a storyline has got somebody, is when it makes them cry. Yeah. I mean, like, as a creator, if you can make them cry by reading your comic book, that is awesome.
Yeah. Well, and there's no tragedy in this book, thank goodness. I felt like we needed hope ultimately, but there's certain things that'll just, certain movies and things that'll just make me I'm just going to bawl the entire way through. Like watching Moana, it's like, oh look, the ocean. Okay, I'm done. I'm just going to cry. Or Boromir coming over the hill, in Lord of the Rings. I'm like, I just start Kleenex. Get me Kleenex. It doesn't matter how many times you've read that scene or seen that scene. I'm done. It's no words are needed. You know what's going to happen, and still he tries. It's the intent. The redemption through this act.
Yeah, and it's hard for a creator to do that too. Well, with the exception of Game of Thrones, what's his face obviously can kill characters off with no regrets whatsoever, but.
Don't touch the dragons. I was so upset, the first time an animal got hurt. That's the hard line for me. It's don't hurt the animals,
Have you watched the last couple of episodes of
of which one?
Of the last season of Game of Thrones?
No, I swore off when certain creative choices were made, and I know what happens, but I was like, well, I just don't need to watch this. I don't need to be upset by this show at this point. It's there's certain actors and actresses I think are phenomenal, but I'm like, oh, their eyes have been gouged out. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't need to see this, So I was just kind of bummed by those choices. But I mean, I think it's really nice that we have a lot more fantasy on television. Not everything is Law and Order version, 12 billion.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I'm so tired of that. I was trying to watch Elementary, the other day. I was like, it's a procedural. I can make it. I like these characters. Can I do it? So just the format, it's so, rigid at times. So it's just nice when a show will move outside that format. It's like, that's why something like Westworld is so refreshing, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's not, this thing will be resolved by the end of the episode every week,
Right.
Stay tuned for the second of two, this two-parter, And you have to wait the entire summer to find out if so-and-so died or, is going to hell because they had sex. So.
Actually, two of the best procedurals I know that break the mold was Monk, and the latest one was Lucifer, which is coming to Netflix.
Yeah, so. I was happy to see that it was saved. I am an ardent original Lucifer Run fan, so I like the show for what it is. I don't like it as a accurate representation of the comic.
Oh, it's not.
Not the comic. I've had people pitch it to me as, it's just like the comic. I'm like, you obviously haven't read the comic. But yeah, I followed that one on its original run. I have every issue, and then I have it, collected because I loved it so much. So I think that's one of the best examples of comic writing. It's such a tight arc. It's like it's 75 issues, but it's so well, thought out and connected,
That's like people who watched the sci-fi Dresden Files TV show and thought it was like the books.
Oh, yeah. No.
Where's Marconi, for one thing? I was like, you guys missed a huge opportunity for that, back and forth, and that relationship is so interesting. I was like, you guys just missed out so much.
But they did create a very interesting take on Bob.
Yeah.
Which, so, I mean, they have to change a little bit for the medium, but yeah, it became its own animal, like a lot of those things do. Like Lucifer, like, a few others. I'm sure there's others I can remember if I wasn't talking into a microphone and blanking. So
yeah, I know when you start talking, you're like, and then an hour later, you're like, oh yeah, that thing that I watched yesterday that I can't remember. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, because I watch a lot of anime and I often read the manga, and their adaptations are usually fairly accurate. If you've read the manga, oh, here it is on screen,
With the exception of the filler. When they're waiting for the writer.
Oh my God, the Blue Exorcist with those episodes.
Yes.
This has nothing to do with anything. And, and I've recommended it to people, say, okay, this is the episodes you avoid. And then you go to you go to the next season, because you'll be the better for it. And we just don't speak of it.
Well, Dragon Ball Z did a lot of that when they did Dragon Ball Z Kai, they literally cut out all of the filler, and they lost like 50 episodes or something crazy like that. But, you see the same thing in Fairy Tail, and even One Punch Man didn't have any of that, but then they're not going to have two until he's finished with another arc or something. But, you're talking to another anime person, too.
Yeah, I know. I want the season 2 of Castlevania, please, now.
Yes, that was awesome.
It was so good. I was like, I was watching it while I was texting one of my best friends, frantically going, you have to watch this right now so we can scream about it. And she did. So we were just yelling the entire way through, like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
And it was only 4 episodes. They only did 4.
I know. It was horrible. I was like, this is amazing. And there's only 4. What is this cruel fate? Oh, I have a lot of manga. I'm just looking at my shelf going, I need a new bookshelf.
See, I picked up very little manga, but I do watch like every anime that I can get my hands on, and I usually check it out online too if I can. I just don't have time to read all the manga too.
Well, and I started reading manga back when Blade of the Immortal started. That was like my first manga, which is kind of oh look, there's gore. oh, look, there's more gore.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is an interesting intro. Now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh, huh. And it was weird because it was like this thing where a friend at school introduced me to it, and then, I just collect the volumes, and it was like the one manga my sister will read. It's weird. I mean, there's so many, quote unquote, nice, happy little manga out there. And no, this is the only one she'll read. She doesn't care about any of them. We'd watch like Sayuki when they would release, the episodes, we'd be like, it was like a thing, we'd be like, oh my God, the new episode's out. Let's go watch it. And she's like, so that was another one that was fun, but it did have a lot of filler. I remember it was like so tedious sometimes. Like, when's the next story arc coming out?
So which one of those you mentioned anime when you were talking about your plot line about the witches and everything? So like Madoka Magica, Little Witches, any of that inform your magic?
I actually avoided things like Little Witch Academia because I didn't want to, unknowingly crib anything, until I was done. Yep. I mean, I watch a lot of. There's so many anime that have magical symbols. It's like there's going to be a set of magical symbols. All look vaguely similar. And, I mean, I'm trying to remember all the ones I've watched because it's a long list. But basically, if it's, probably vaguely magical, I've probably seen at least a couple episodes because I try them all. Some of them you don't want to watch. I mean, I don't like all the mecha ones. I unabashedly love Voltron because it's a giant robot in space, and they're space lions, and they're all complete failbots. Like, they're so bad at this. You're like, oh my God, you guys, you need like a smack upside the head and a hug and a, good meal. Plus, the Galra are purple. When's the last time we had villains who are purple? And that one really doesn't have magical symbols, but it's got the quintessence, which is its own thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's like that. I love anime and manga because, sometimes American comics just doesn't go there. They don't say, well, this is a completely crazy idea. Let's try it. Whereas, manga writer will just say, this is nuts. I'm just going to do it. And then, it sells 12 million copies because people are like, this is awesome. Nobody's done this before, because they just didn't go there.
Well, and there's a big difference between the two, what do you call it? I'm blanking completely now. The two readerships, right? So, like in Japan, RPG is their like almost NC-17, or the other way around, right? Our NC-17 is their like PG. They that's where you get like hentai from. But so when you're writing your stuff, are you targeting a specific level of readership? Or from what you said, I'm assuming there's like no gore or tentacles. So
no, there's no gore or tentacles. There is kissing.
Ooh, scandalous.
Yes, I know, scandalous, and so there is some romance in there. It's not NC-17 rated, but this is a book that has some adult characters, so not intended for like elementary school kids, obviously. But I think young adult, new adult audiences, I didn't have a specific demographic. I was like, I would like this to appeal to the 18 to 34 range. I was like, I'm just going to write this story, and whatever rating it turns out to be, it turns out. I mean, I could have written it, a hardcore, quote unquote gritty thriller, and it could have been an entirely different book, and it would have been R-rated. But I didn't want to write that story right now. I think that I could definitely write another story within this verse. It's a little scarier, a little more perilous, but that wasn't where these, characters ended up,
And you like you mentioned all these authors that I know, and of course all those animes, and it seems like the trend these days is when you are going to write urban fantasy or just science fiction or something like that, you're not just going to go the Arthur C. Clarke route for the most part, or Ray Bradbury, and write a one-off, a really interesting story with a premise that grabs you. You're going to create a magic system. You're going to create a world. You're going to spend months building that world. And then you get into situations like you just said where, like, you know, I've got these main characters and this is the main storyline. Oh, but I've got these other characters that I've got these, you know, all these backstory now that I want to show. And, you know, do I write that as novelettes, or, you know, do I a short story collection in addition to the main storyline? And is that have you been thinking through that kind of thing?
Well, I think that there are certainly side characters, but I think that the world, you know, that this takes place in is big enough, you know, and there's enough history that I've had ideas for stories that don't necessarily involve these three characters, excuse me, that are perhaps different time periods, you know, different characters, different circumstances, which is a cool, you know, freedom. I realized that as I was writing the story, I was like, this is a huge world, you know, as I was writing it. And I, you know, when I'm writing something, I have you know, I map things out in index cards, you know, I outline, but I also keep a little book for every, you know, work. And it's got, you know, as I'm world building, so I have all these things down. And sometimes, you know, in the course of world building, you come to these conclusions. You know, it becomes clear what else is going on. Because often from the start, you just say, well, this is a cool concept. You know, I might, you know, witches in D.C. I mean, that might be the premise. And then it turns into this.
Gotta be careful not to look too closely into everything, because I'm trying to explain everything, because then that's how you end up with midichlorians.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, we don't talk about the trilogy. No, I just rewatched the Last Jedi, and I've just been watching the blow up of, you know, what they want to fund a new movie. I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys. And I saw, you know, Gavia tweeted that wonderful quote where you could just write fanfic and not spend any money. Yeah, it's like, that's what, you know, everyone who's not a butthurt nerd bro has been doing for, you know, years, decades, centuries. You know, we've been writing fanfic. And it's fine. We're okay. If you go to, you know, the different archives, there are novel length stories which, if they were published as, you know, they're just as good, if not better, than a lot of stuff I've read off the bookshelf. You know, I've read some stories that they could be bestsellers, you know, if they, you know, oh, they're just fanfic, quote unquote.
Well, then you get the odd fanfic out there, like the most famous one of all, 50 Shades, which was horribly written and yet is like one of the most well-known and profitable properties out there.
Yeah, actually, no, it's funny. I brought it up because we didn't talk about this in the last episode. I don't know. Did either of you see the article? Lucasfilm had released what George Lucas's idea was for
midichlorians.
Oh, God, yeah, I did read that. And then I wondered, you know, what I'd been drinking, and it was water, but I had it. It's like, well, it's clear liquid. It could be vodka. No, it was water. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
the fact that there are these little creatures that live in the microverse called the Wills, and like, as soon as I read that, it clicked, because the original title of Star Wars was the Journal of Luke Skywalker, or an entry of the Journal of the Wills, something like that. I can't remember the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, a journey from the journey of the Wills.
It was Luke Starkiller at that point.
Starkiller, right? It was Starkiller, right? So, and I always wondered, like, well, who is these Wills that this book is about? You know, and unfortunately, he was going to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly some concepts don't come off right.
So for all the fans are so upset out there, it could have been so much worse.
I know. I mean, there's so many good concepts in a body of work like Star Wars, and there's, you know, and certainly I've been. I asked one of my friends who's an ardent fan of, you know, the comics as well as the books, and I just said, give me a pile of recommendations, because I need to catch up on some of the comics. So I have been catching up on things like Vader and, you know, the main book, and some of them are so well written that I was like, we could have had this as a movie, and I'm bitter.
Yep.
Because they're so good. I'm like, yes, I would watch this, you know, 12 seasons of, you know, Vader going around and doing his thing, and it's like, yeah, he's a bad guy, but this is so interesting in building out the universe. And then there's questions of how do these works feature into things like the upcoming, movie, when that comes out. It's like, because I saw an interesting theory posited about Kylo Ren's lightsaber. I'm like, that would be really cool if you guys went that direction. But, then some works obviously aren't going to have any effect. It's like, so to what degree are those going to be tied in, to other stories? Some things I think are to tie in, and some things I think should just be kept far apart with a massive wall between them and some kind of security system on top of that. Perhaps, buried somewhere, just to make sure that we're all safe. But no, I should say that I liked, the latest Star Wars movie. I haven't seen Solo yet, mostly because I've been too busy, and I didn't feel like watching a Solo movie at this point. I'm sure it's fine. I just didn't feel like it. But I do love Rey. I love how she's a ball of rage and occasional giant mistakes. So that's refreshing.
Right.
It makes her a little bit more relatable, right?
Well, then women don't get to be angry. The way that she just is angry and just, goes for things, and just demands is, not common in a lot of heroines. So I think that it's good to show that there's more than one way to write a strong female character, quote unquote. It's like, Leia is a strong female character, but she goes about things in a completely different way. Rose, same thing. Women can be different things. You can have more than one woman in a movie where there's, lightsabers. Ooh. Of course, then they kill them off, so. Another issue. It's like the supernatural thing. That's another, urban fantasy, as it were, but it's not good to its female characters.
No, but I'm still shocked that show's still on air. So
I stopped watching years ago, and I've occasionally someone say, "Oh, it's the 1200th season." I'm like, what?
Yes, exactly. And everyone I know that were fans are all like, "Yeah, I don't watch it anymore." I'm like, then how is this still on TV? No one's watching it.
It's the people that watch Gotham. They're supporting.
Oh, that explains.
No, it's like things like Arrow, where I watched the first 2 or 3 seasons, which were really good, and then I was like, okay, they're settling into a formula, and then it's not as good. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's like you have the first season, first season of Westworld, phenomenal. First season of Arrow, I'm thinking of some of the fight scenes in there that were so good because we hadn't seen that. He's a non-superpowered character who's doing these things, and you actually see the toll. It's like, yeah, this is the closest we're getting to Batman on TV. It's great.
Oh I actually have kind of fallen off the Arrow bandwagon, and my wife still watches it, but she was binge watching the most recent season. And this episode came on, and Diggle and Ollie get into this big fight, and he's like, "Oh, I can't be your partner anymore," and blah, blah. And I'm like, they've already done this at least 2 other times on the show.
Yeah.
Is it that hard to come up with an original idea?
I don't know. It's just, it does seem like there's certain storylines that get recycled,
Well, I think we've been spoiled because all those shows have been, at the very least, they started good, and The Flash is still going strong, and the writing's very good. But you keep forgetting, it's on the CW.
Right.
So you're going to get, yeah.
No, I think that there's something to be said for stopping a show when it's still good, because often these shows they'll push them for 13 seasons, and I'm thinking of things like Black Sails, which, if you haven't seen Black Sails, I wholeheartedly recommend that. It's on the surface, it's a show about pirates, but there is so much else being said. There are amazing canon queer characters and fierce, lady characters who don't get murdered horribly. It's not all of them.
Wait, that's a possibility?
Yeah, I know. I was watching so saying, wait, I'm waiting for them to die. What? They're living? What is this madness? But no, just that kind of show. I I love it from the theme song, to the sets, to the acting. It was just such a fun ride, the whole way through. And so it's difficult to find those shows. It's like something like Westworld comes up, like, oh my God, I found another show that's really good. And the problem is sometimes it feels like they're trying to be too clever sometimes, some of these shows. Mm-hmm. And I'm not necessarily sure time jumps are always the way to go, but and I'd like to see Ed Harris be a good guy once in a while.
Yeah.
Phenomenal actor. I'm like, but he's in it, and then the gentleman who plays my mind just went completely blank. Jimmy Simpson is that the actor's name? Him, his role, and I'm like, oh, he's in it. I'm like, wait, he's going to be a bad guy, isn't he?
Oh, the younger version.
Yes,
of him.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm like, because I see those two actors, I'm like, I'm so happy to see you. I enjoy your work wholeheartedly. You're a villain, aren't you? I'm like, I'm going to enjoy what you're doing, but at the same time, I saw an interview with the actor, and he was saying something like his parents were thrilled when he was a good guy. I was like, yeah, I understand that feeling because, I understand they get typecast,
Yep.
Right.
Which is frustrating, but it was so, so I like to see when it's, flipped a little bit, when you have someone who's not supposed to be the bad guy, be the bad guy. Why the reveal is so good, because you're like, oh, crap, I didn't see that coming. Or if you did see that coming and saw the little things they planted, which I did, I was like, oh, yeah, this is not good. Then, yeah.
Yeah, that the latest season of was it Power Man? Luke Cage actually does that very well.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think they did that the last season on Luke Cage, which was you kept thinking, oh, this is a bad guy. This is a bad guy. He's dead. Now this other person's a bad guy. No, they're a good guy. Wait, I can't understand this anymore.
Well, plus you have the shady Mariah dynamic, which I swear was the most interesting part of the entire show. Because Luke Cage, who, obviously phenomenal, so well acted, and you're like, I'm rooting for him. At the same time, please don't kill these two other characters because they're so fascinating. They're bad people. They do bad things. But it's interesting to watch, and they're good adversaries. It's like watching Wilson Fisk. You don't want him to get killed off because he's such an interesting adversary.
Right.
I was thinking that debate on, that it's always, oh, well, if you like a villain, you're empathizing with him, you're excusing it's his, his or her deeds. So you can, and this is different from real life, where real life villains, you don't do that, but fictional villains, you could say, well, this is an interesting storyline. You're complete trash fire and deserve whatever consequences you get. But it's an interesting take,
Right.
So I think that's an important distinction, which sometimes gets lost. People forget that you can do both. People can multitask,
Sometimes.
And the bad guys are usually in their story the good guys, and they usually, if you've written them well, they have a motivation that you can empathize with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can have I think that might not always be true. You can understand their motivation. You may not empathize, because even if they're a hero in their own mind, they don't necessarily have to be a version of a hero in some verse.
Right.
I think that's because someone like, I'm trying to think. There's been so many Marvel villains. Someone like Thanos. Just different. Someone like Thanos or someone like Loki or, Hydra. It's like, well, you can understand why Hydra's doing what they're doing. I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. None at all.
Or I think the best example of a villain like that is the Joker, especially in the Heath Ledger version of The Dark Knight, where it's like you don't empathize with him, you don't like what he does, but he's such an interesting character you can't stop watching him.
Right. And of course the Jack Nicholson portrayal. You couldn't. That was the first one I saw, of course, and I remember watching that as a little kid, probably too young to be watching that movie. There's a bunch of movies I look back on now and look at my dad and just go, huh. Interesting. I watched Terminator way too young. And I'm not talking Terminator 2. I'm talking the first one, which was way more violent,
You had the same upbringing I did.
Oh, yeah. lots of, I mean, I watched those Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry marathons when I was little. And, you know,
oh, wow.
Oh, God, yeah. I was like, oh, my gosh. In retrospect, I'm like, wow, maybe not what I watched. So lots of James Bond, lots of Dirty Harry, lots of The Man with No Name. Late at night. Watched Alien from behind the couch as a really little kid.
It explains some of your influences and your favorite stories. So I was going to say, you know, we were talking about what's good, what's original. I think people definitely want something original. They should check out I Am Hexed. So is there anything else that you've written that people can check out?
Well, you can read I write at the Mint, you know, the Comics Mint,
okay,
you know, which is a monthly newsletter. And so there I do this thing, which is really cool. I do a column called The Process. And so I interview comic creators about their work. So I talk to, you know, letterers, colorists, artists, writers, everybody basically. And I've talked to people from all different sides of industries, levels of experience, you know, manga creators, you know, traditional comics, different mediums, watercolorists, and just, you know, talk to them about their work, how they got into comics, you know, what they like about it, and just take them through, you know, a project, or if they want to talk it more general terms, which is really great. So I do that every month. I've actually just lined up the two for the next couple months, so those are ready to go. Can't wait to put those out. And then I have an ongoing series in the Mint where I'm examining the Archie Comics verse, which is taking over the world. It's like Star Wars. I swear, Archie Comics is like Star Wars. It's just taking over. So, you know, looking at, you know, most recent iterations of Archie Comics, of course.
Right.
You know, some of the Sabrina stuff and, you know, the Jughead stuff, as well as, you know, Afterlife with Archie, which don't read if you have animal harm issues. That was upsetting.
Oh, jeez.
It was a really good book, but I was sitting here saying, I did not sign up for this part. I'm upset. I'm hugging my animals quite tightly at the moment. And, you know, and then this other issue I've been doing is looking back at sort of the golden age of Archie Comics. So I read the Golden Age collection, you know, with the first Archie Comics.
Oh, wow.
Where, oh my God, where he's driving a jalopy,
mm-hmm.
you know, and he called chick, and, you know, all those, you know, all the different language, you know, the different, you know, value systems that are obviously espoused in it. So it's really fun to look at the way the styles have developed and changed over the years, and the different styles between the different books, because you have Werewolf Jughead and Vampire Veronica, you know, and things like that. And then you have the comic book tie into Riverdale, which is its own unique, sprawling, interesting creature by this point, which
mm-hmm.
I think the exclamation I hear most on Twitter is, what is this show? What? Because season 1 was one thing and season 2 is an entirely different creature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I've been doing right now, is just working on those two, which is a lot of fun, and it's just nice to look at a particular set of works, you know, over the years, and just the styles of different artists and writers. So.
Cool. That actually all sounds interesting. I'll have to check that out. And of course, we're getting a little, you know, about an hour now, so one of the questions we normally like to wrap it up on is, how do you measure success?
Oh, that's a complicated question. But I think that at the basic level, I think that success is not about, you know, sales numbers, I think, for some people, but I think success is about creating the thing that you want to be creating. And for some people, that's, you know, a web comic, you know, that's massively successful. For other people, it's going to be, you know, pamphlets. You know, for me, I want to be creating these stories where I'm seeing women and queer people, you know, in roles that are not canon fodder and being relegated to the background. It's like, I was talking to a friend and she was saying, I just realized your villains are like these straight white dudes, you know, that certain archetype. I looked at her and I said, how long have you known me? She's like, I'm so sorry. Because yeah, my characters are queer. A lot of them are women, you know, as we don't see enough of that. It's on Netflix. There's a show called Sniffer about a guy who sniffs out crime. He sniffs out crime. But we have too many, but we can't have, we couldn't have had a Black Widow movie or, another TV show about a female superhero because we need a show about a man who sniffs out crime.
This is true.
Oh my, I nearly threw my television because I just thought, this is ridiculous. This is why we need more stories. This is why I want to see 12 million ridiculous romantic comedy comics. I want to see I want to see happy comics. I want to see sad comics. I want to see all the variations. Because I can watch so many bad movies or read so many comics that tell the same story over and over and over again. But we need that, other people other than the standard capes, indie comics, stories that are not what we've seen. Because if you've read a Batman comic, you're like, oh, there's just another storyline that's going to come up, and this seems awfully familiar. Like go to your bookshelf. They did a version of that 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm really picky about the Batman I read. It's like I'll read Jason Todd and just about anything, but I'm pickier about Batman. So
nice. Where can they find your stuff? And you probably answered this, but about what time should people start looking for the first issue to come out?
Well, we're working on the timeline, the exact timeline, so hopefully we'll have an announcement, if not before the end of the Kickstarter, then after it, because the Kickstarter ends on the 18th of July, and so I think we're aiming for, late summer, early fall, but that's not a guarantee yet. We haven't finalized the date yet. Mm-hmm. We will be making that announcement. We have Hexed, on Twitter where, people can follow us and sort of get news and updates on that kind of thing. And then, I can be found on Twitter as well. And then I'm just, Kat Ann Thompson with a K. So you can definitely find me there. I talk about, politics and superhero stuff and not superhero stuff and feminism, and there's often cute animal pictures, so there's a lot of cats.
I was going to say, I went through your Twitter, and all I can say is, and it's not a critique, it's just it could use more cats.
Well, I honestly could put more pictures of my cats. Did you see the one where my Bengal is climbing the wall of my pantry? Oh my God.
I have one that does that.
Yeah, I keep telling people, they're like, oh, they're so beautiful. They see the pictures on there. Like, they are a cat for when you've leveled up in cat ownership. Because that cat is called Parker because he's been climbing walls since I got him as a kitten. I mean, he climbs walls. They're smart. They will open any door they can get their paws on. They can jump like 4 or 5 feet vertically in the air. They will jump on anything, to anything, and they don't care. And then the little splotched one, he was a surprise Siamese. So I've got a Bengal training a Siamese cat, which is just as terrifying as it sounds.
Jeez.
Yeah, I'm like, I did this to myself. I love them, but sometimes I'm like, I come downstairs, I'm like, what happened? I don't know what happened. I don't want to know. I just want to get through this. But no, they're great, and you'll see lots of pictures of my cats on there. Occasional dog pictures, my long-suffering dog.
Aww.
Who doesn't know how she ended up here. She just wasn't included. But yeah, I think that my Twitter's probably an eclectic mix of stuff and occasionally very shouty. More shouty than usual right now, of course, about politics because it is a trash fire in this country. So,
I get that, yeah.
Yeah. Like, why is this happening? I'd like to, it's like I was telling someone that's like, I'd like to not be yelling about politics, but there's a reason we have to be yelling about politics right now, so.
Alrighty then. Well, I think that's a good place to put a pin in it for this week. So, Kirsten, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and listening to me ramble about I Am Hexed and other things.
That's fine. I can't wait to see the first issue.
Yes, and for those listening, don't forget to follow her on Twitter, and of course, go to the Kickstarter and check it out. Pre-order your copy today because this seems like it's going to be a great book, and everyone should be reading it. So, On that note, boys and girls, as always, don't let your cape get caught in the door. Have a good week.